Okay, so welcome everyone to today's information session, and this is for all members who've been selected for 2021 QA assessment. My name is Dina Vaidhiraj, and I'm one of the advanced practice consultants here at the college. And I'm also joined today by some other colleagues, including Karen Kirkham, Christine Turnbull, and Catriona Mill, and you will hear from them shortly. I want to take a moment to thank you all for making the time to join today's webinar. We appreciate that it's a busy time, and we want to thank you for your commitment to patient safety and for your ongoing professional development. Next slide, please. So our discussion today will be divided into two sections. The first section will be for all selected members, so RNs, RPNs, and nurse practitioners. And we will spend the first 15 minutes providing you with a brief overview of QA's current program, and then dive into the QA assessment activities. We will discuss our new coaching opportunities and then answer your questions. After the question and answers are complete, RNs and RPNs will leave the Zoom meeting. The second session is for NPs only. We will review the NP case example and answer your questions at that time. Next slide, please. At the end of our information session, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. Since microphones have been muted, kindly send us your questions by chat. To use the chat feature, please select chat from the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. Type in your questions in the chat box. We will open the session for questions at the end. Next slide, please. So what is the purpose of the QA program? The Regulated Health Professions Act requires CNO to establish and administer a quality assurance program that assists nurses in maintaining competence and continually evaluating their practice. All nurses registered with the college in the general and extended classes are expected to participate in the QA program. Nurses maintain and enhance their competence through daily practice reflection, lifelong learning, and by integrating that learning into their practice. As practicing nurses, QA is integral in ensuring the public receives safe, quality, and ethical care. Next slide, please. Every year, CNO randomly selects nurses to participate in the QA assessment. All of you participating on today's Zoom call were randomly selected to participate in the 2021 QA assessment program. A notification letter explaining your selection and the assessment activities was sent to each of you. So you are required to complete two activities, the learning plan and the code of conduct practice activity. In addition, nurse practitioners have an additional requirement to reflect their extended scope of practice. The submission deadline is October 20th, 2021, unless you've been granted an extension or a deferral. Next slide, please. But before we speak to the QA activities, we just want to take a moment to acknowledge the exceptional circumstances the pandemic continues to bring to the nursing profession. And we want to take the opportunity to thank you for the important role that you're playing to your patients and their families, and for continuing to demonstrate your ongoing commitment to safe, quality patient care. We also recognize that these difficult and challenging times has likely impacted your practice in unexpected ways. So because of the pandemic, this year, our QA assessment activities are focused around reflection on your own practice and applying the standards. Coaching support is also available to help guide you through this process. In addition, CNO has implemented a policy which can grant a one-time 4-week extension to members who may need a little bit more time to complete the activities. Members who are facing extenuating circumstances like illness may also request a deferral to the next QA cycle. We will speak a little bit more to extensions and deferrals shortly. Next slide, please. The instructions you need to complete your learning plan can be found on page 4 of your self-assessment guide, which you will find in your folder on SharePoint. You will also see that all of the required activities, including the learning plan template, has been uploaded to your SharePoint folder. You will need to submit at least 2 learning goals and ensure that all the fields are filled out before you submit it to CNO. We also encourage you to review the evaluation criteria, which can be found on page 8 of the guide. If you have any specific questions about the learning plan, please let us know during the Q&A session. I'll now turn it over to Karen, who will speak about the Code of Conduct practice activity.
Thank you, Dina. Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Kirkham. I'm an advanced practice consultant at CNO. I'm going to introduce our new Code of Conduct practice activity. The Code of Conduct is a practice standard that all nurses are expected to uphold. It articulates what the people of Ontario can expect from nurses and sets the bar for those in the nursing profession. All nurses selected for QA assessment will be required to complete the Code of Conduct practice activity. This activity gives you an opportunity to demonstrate that you understand the principles outlined in the code and that you apply them in your practice. Everyone is required to submit one example that demonstrates one principle. The Code of Conduct is not just for nurses who work directly with patients. We recognize that nursing practice is very diverse. So while some principles may better reflect a role that involves direct patient care, other principles are easily demonstrated in any nursing role. Regardless of where you work or what your role looks like, there are principles that apply directly to your practice. All nurses are required to select one principle from the code and provide an example of how they demonstrate that principle in their practice. You might be wondering where to begin. Next slide, please. The Code of Conduct consists of 6 principles. Under each principle are a set of statements. Here is an example of the first principle in the code. Nurses respect the dignity of patients and treat them as individuals, and the accompanying statements. Start by reviewing each of the 6 principles and select one that best reflects your day-to-day practice. Think of an interaction, an experience, or an event from your practice where you demonstrated that principle. Your example does not need to cover every statement that falls under the principle, but your example should be about at least one of those statements. For example, you might select principle number 1 and provide an example from your practice where you show respect to a patient's culture, identity, beliefs, values, and goals. Next slide. Here are some key things to remember about your Code of Conduct submission. Provide enough detail that the peer assessor coach reading your submission can determine that you understand the principle and that you apply it in your practice. Make sure you review the Code of Conduct practice activity example. The next slide will show you where you can access that example. Your example must be based on one interaction, experience, or event. The example must be from your own practice. Use I or my. Do not provide a hypothetical situation. In other words, don't talk about what you would do, talk about what you did do. It's your own example, so use your own words. We want to hear what you have to say. And lastly, review your example before you submit. Make sure it fits under the correct principle and that it meets the submission criteria that's outlined in the guide. Next slide. Just a reminder that there are examples of completed learning plans and Code of Conduct practice activities. We encourage you to review these examples before you upload your final documents to SharePoint. You can access them on this web page. A link to this page is available on page 5 of your QA assessment guide. Next slide. Guidance and support are available now if needed. Our advanced practice consultants can provide clarification and guidance on the requirements of the QA activities, as well as information on deferrals and extensions. This support from our advanced practice consultants is available throughout the program. If you would like to avail of this support and guidance before the October 20th deadline, you can email the QA program and one of the QA team members will be in touch with you. Once the deadline of October 20th has passed and you submitted your QA activity assessment activities, CNO will assign a peer assessor coach who will then review and assess your learning plan, Code of Conduct activity, as well as the NP case example and provide feedback. The peer assessor coach will also write a report for the Quality Assurance Committee. The peer assessor coach will recommend to the committee if your activities are satisfactory or if they need more information. They may recommend that you participate in coaching to assist you with completing the activities satisfactorily. Coaching is optional and can provide support to members who require resubmission or for those wanting feedback on their submissions. Next slide. As we mentioned earlier, given the pandemic, you may be able to delay your participation in QA assessment if you have exceptional circumstance. Extensions are granted based on a member's unique situations, and they are a one-time 4-week extension. To request an extension, please contact the QA program. To be considered for a deferral, you must complete and submit a deferral form and provide supporting documentation to the QA committee. The committee will review your submissions and decide if you can delay your participation. To request a deferral, send an email to the QA program and we'll send you the deferral form and additional instructions. There is more information about the extension and deferrals on page 7 of your guide. Next slide. To summarize, please review your QA assessment guide along with the resources mentioned in this presentation. The deadline for all your submissions is October 20th, unless you have been granted an extension of 4 weeks or a deferral. For questions or support, please contact the QA program at qaassessment@cnomail.org, or you can call us at 416-963-3922, or toll free at 1-800-387-5526, extension 3922. Next slide. We will now take your questions. Please enter them in the chat. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Catriona Mill, who will facilitate our Q&A portion.
Thanks so much, Karen, and good afternoon, everyone. So we're just going to stop sharing this slide deck. And again, as Karen mentioned, this is your opportunity to ask any questions. Again, just to respect people's privacy, we are encouraging you to send your questions to us by chat, and we would be happy to answer them. So I'll give people a few minutes. You can send them to QA team using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. And it looks like we have one question that's come in from one of our attendees. And they're asking about the learning plan template and whether they have to submit their learning plan using the template. So I'm wondering, Dina, would you like to answer that question? Do members need to use the learning plan template?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So you can use the template, or you can actually submit your own template, but just have to ensure that you identify 2 learning goals and that you meet the requirements of the learning plan as outlined on page 4 of your QA assessment guide. I'd also advise that you review the learning plan evaluation criteria on page 8, as this is what the peer assessors are looking for when they assess your learning plan.
Thanks so much, Dina. It looks like learning plan is a popular topic. We have another question from a member. Can resources as part of your learning plan be started or done pre-2021? So I guess they're asking if you have a goal that includes some activities from a previous year. Is that possible? Dina, do you want to answer that one as well?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Your goals can be carried forward into future years as well. You just have to articulate what activities that you're doing this year to show that you're meeting your goals. You know, as I mentioned previously, just ensure that you're identifying or meeting the requirements of the learning plan. And what's new this year as well is the code of conduct, ensuring that you are selecting a code of conduct principle for your learning plan, and that's indicated in the guide as well. So you can read more about that on page 4 of your QA assessment guide.
Okay, we have another question around the learning plan. Dina, I'm going to pass this one to you again. So is there a time frame for the learning goals? Do they need to be completed by December 31st, 2021?
No, they don't need to be. We're not looking for time frames. You can actually, as long as you're articulating what activities you're doing and you're being, specific about that, that's completely fine. Again, the requirements for what the peer assessors are looking for can be found on page 8. Those are the evaluation criteria. So yeah, I encourage you to review that on page 8 of the QA assessment guide.
Thanks so much, Dina. So we have another question from a member asking that they haven't worked in 2 years. So they're wondering, how do they complete their learning plan and their QA assessment activities? Karen, I'm wondering if you might want to respond to that question.
Sure. Well, nurses are required to develop learning plans on an annual basis. And so we expect that nurses would already have a learning plan in place this year. I can understand that there might be a challenge with the fact that you're not employed, but that does not prevent you from reflecting back on your practice and think about some areas from your practice where you could develop some learning goals from and develop some activities. There's an awful lot of learning opportunities for nurses. You don't need to be in a workplace to access your learning activities. So I would advise you to follow the steps in the guide and reflect on your practice and develop your goals from there.
That's great. Thank you, Karen. And again, please send your questions through chat to myself at QA team. It's in the list there on your chat. So we have some more questions coming in, which is great. So we have a question from a member who says that they do not have Microsoft Word on their computer. So Dina, I'm wondering if you want to speak to how members can submit if they don't have Word and they're having problems with the templates.
So the beauty of SharePoint is that you could work online. So you don't need to actually have Microsoft Word installed on your computer. You don't need like Pages if you're using Mac. You can actually work directly online and it saves automatically. So yeah, so if you're having difficulty with that, just please email QAassessment@cnomail.org and we can walk you through it.
Thanks, Dina. And, we appreciate this is a stressful time right now for nurses. And so, I think if you're having the technical challenges, as Dina said, please do reach out to us. And one of our members of our QA team would be happy to walk you through things or look for an alternative. We definitely don't want the technology to be a barrier to people completing. So thanks for that question. So we have another one, Karen, and I'm wondering if you might want to speak to this. So this member is saying that she is off on maternity leave and wondering if she can use her 2020 learning plan.
Actually, that's a good question. So it sort of ties into the previous question we had, I think. The selection this year is actually for your 2021 learning plan. If there are components of your 2020 learning plan that you carried over into 2021 because maybe you were on mat leave or you hadn't finished your activities, you can carry on with the learning goals that you set. We would just expect that within 2021, you would again reflect on your practice. So even though you might not actively be at work, you're still able to reflect on your practice, look at those learning goals that you did set for yourself in 2020. And do you need to revise them now that you're home? And how are you preparing to return to work after your mat leave? Those could be additional goals that you can set for yourself. So I would advise that you have a look at the criteria, have a look at where you are right now and reflect on your practice today. And there might be an opportunity for you to move some things forward from 2020 that maybe you didn't complete last year. I don't know if Dina has anything to add to that.
Yeah, just to echo what Karen said, I also just wanted to mention that if you are on maternity leave, you might just also want to consider when you will be returning back to work. So you might be able to qualify for a deferral. So if that's the case, you might just want to reach out to us at QAassessment@cnomail.org, and we can discuss your unique situation.
Great, thank you, Dina, and thank you, Karen. So we have another more kind of technical question that's come in through the chat. And this member is asking, do we upload our completed activities to the same page where the assignment was sent to us? So I'm assuming they're referring to the SharePoint site. So Dina, I see you nodding there. Do you want to try and answer that question?
Sure, thank you. Yes, thanks for your question. And yes, you would be uploading it to your SharePoint folder before the October 20th deadline. Yes, and if you have any questions about how to do that, please email us.
Great, thank you. So we have another question that's come through. Karen, I'm wondering if you want to speak to this one. This member is asking how they can access the recording of this session for reference later.
Oh, did we have that already? I think that they should contact QA, but I think that we are also including it right in a follow-up email. I think that link will be coming out, but I believe it is going to be included where you accessed all of the case examples. It will be sitting in there as soon as it's ready. That's my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
Spot on, Karen. So after today's presentation, we will post the recording on the page that Karen and Dina both spoke to today that has all the assessment guide, the tools, as well as those completed examples of each of the activities. And in addition, we will be sending out an email to all members who have been selected with a link directly to that recording. We appreciate it's a busy time, and for nurses who are working, this may have not been a convenient time for us to join the session. And I'm the kind of person who always likes to review information afterwards, so we want to make sure this recording is available to everyone. So thanks for that question. Oh, so we have a question again about SharePoint. So thank you, everyone. You know, I appreciate SharePoint may be a new platform for people. And as you may be aware, we are in the midst of making enhancements to our QA program and looking to leverage technology. We will have a more comprehensive QA platform moving forward. But this year, we are trying to be paperless. We are trying to really be accessible with the pandemic. And so we are using SharePoint. So we've had a question that's come in around, will we receive a message after we upload our submissions to SharePoint saying that they were submitted successfully? So maybe I'll take that one and give Dina and Karen a bit of a break here. So no, you will not. It doesn't prompt you to say submitted successfully. But after October 20th, we will review everyone's SharePoint folders. And you know, if you have a question about your submission and you want some confirmation, please do reach out to us, and one of our team members would be happy to be in touch. Anything else to add on that, Dina or Karen? Okay, we have another question that's come in from a member. If I submit my learning plan before October 20th, can I have some feedback, or do I have to wait until the submission deadline? Dina, would you like to speak to that one?
Sure. Yeah, so the advanced practice consultants do not review or assess your submissions. But if you've got any general questions about the requirements to complete your QA activities, then you can certainly let us know. But to answer your question, no, the advanced practice consultants will not be reviewing your submissions or providing you any feedback. It will only be after the deadline when you will be when your activities will be assigned by reviewed by a peer assessor coach.
Yeah, and there's information in your assessment guide around the role of the peer assessors and coach. So after the 20th, all the submissions will, as Dina said, go to a peer assessor who will review them using the criteria, the scoring criteria that are outlined in the assessment guide. And then they will complete a report, which will go to our quality assurance committee. And then once the committee has reviewed the report, you will get a notification letter letting you know the outcome of that assessment. And at that point, you'll have an option for coaching if you would like to get some feedback around your submission. So great question. I see we have one more question that's come in, and it's just around, Karen, I'm wondering if you want to take this one. It's about how long does the code of conduct practice activity need to be? Is there a word count?
Oh, good question. There is no word count. There is no minimum or maximum length. We recommend that you have a look at the example that we have provided and look at all of the criteria that is in the guide. Keep in mind that when you do your example, you have to provide enough information and enough detail for the peer assessor coach to be able to recognize that you understand the meaning of the principle and that you are applying it in your practice. So I think that you should let that guide the length of your submission. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah.
Thanks, Karen, for that response. Dina, we've had one question come in around coaching support, and if a member is interested in the coaching support, how do they access it?
So prior to October 20th, prior to the deadline, if you'd like some guidance around the requirements for your QA activity, you can certainly message or email the QA assessment at cnomail.org, and one of the advanced practice consultants will can provide you with that guidance on the requirements and any other support that you need around the QA activities. After the October 20th deadline, so after you've submitted your QA activities, the peer assessor coach can then provide you with some more feedback on the on your QA activities at that point in time. So before the 20th, feel free to email us and let us know if you need any support.
Thanks so much, Dina. So we have just a few more minutes for questions. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to send them to us through chat to the QA team in the chat list there. And, you know, again, we are happy to answer questions at any time. You can reach us by email at qaassessment@cnomail.org. And there's also a phone number that you can reach us at. Just to let you know that if you do call us, that if you're wanting to request a deferral or extension, you do need to put that in writing to us. So please send that to us by email. And if you have any other questions, you can leave a voicemail and one of our QA team members will get back to you within 3 business days. So we have one more question that's come in here about a member who has not practiced in several years, and they're actually thinking about moving to the non-practicing class. So they're wondering whether they need to complete a QA assessment. Karen, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. So I think this is a similar question to what we had earlier about the non-practicing. Is that my understanding? It gets back into a member who has not been practicing. So if you decide that you have not practiced for within the last 3 years, you should be transferring into the non-practicing. But if you have practice, but you're not sure if you're going to return to nursing, or if you are sure you're not going to practice again, you can transfer into the non-practicing class. So with the non-practicing class, you are not required to participate in quality assurance. However, if you decide to transfer back into the active class, you will have to complete the activities that were assigned to you this time around. And that's just to, again, to ensure public protection that you are maintaining competence and engaged in continuing learning activities. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's great. Thanks so much, Karen. And I think we have time for one more question. And then maybe we'll end this session and move on to the NP case example tool. So the final question we have here in our chat is, once I submit my learning plan, how long will I have to wait to get feedback after the October 20th deadline? Dina, do you want to speak to that?
So the committee, the Quality Assurance Committee, will review the recommendations of the peer assessors, and then they'll determine whether you can exit the program or if additional information is required from you. And then they'll send you a copy of the peer assessor report along with their decision. And you should receive this information through SharePoint, and that should happen within 14 days of the QA committee meeting.
Thanks, Dina. And right now we have committee meetings scheduled in November and in December. And again, if you have any questions at any point about your submission or timelines, please do email us and we would be happy to provide some further information. We just had a follow-up question about the non-practicing class and whether somebody has to wait until registration time, I'm assuming renewal time, to move into the non-practicing class, or can a member move in at any time? Karen, do you want to respond to that one?
Sure. No, you do not have to wait until renewal time. You can transfer into non-practicing class any time of the year. You just go to the website on CNO where at the top tab says maintain my membership, and you can go in there and you can go ahead and begin the process. You don't have to wait.
Well, thank you so much, Dina and Karen, for answering all these questions. And thank you to all the RNs and RPNs and NPs who have joined us and asked us all these great questions. I hope this has been an informative session for you. And again, if you have any further questions or you'd like to have a conversation about the requirements or your submission, or you need some technical support, please reach out to us at QAassessment@cnomail.org or the phone number which is in your assessment guide. Our team would be more than happy to answer any questions and provide the support that you need. So at this point, I want to thank everybody for joining us. And for those members who are on the webinar who are RNs or RPNs, this brings us to the end of this first part of the session. And our next part will be for our NP members, so nurses in the extended class, where we will be speaking to the additional QA assessment activity that NPs are required to complete this year. So maybe we'll give a few moments to let people exit the webinar, and then we'll move on to the NPs. So Christine, maybe we'll move on to the next part. So I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague Christine, who will speak to our NP case example. Georgianne, would you like to advance the slide? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Catriona. Hello, everyone. I'm Christine Turnbull. I'm an advanced practice consultant with CNO, and I'm also an NP adult. So in addition to the learning plan and the code of conduct practice activity, NPs selected for QA assessment will be required to provide a case example from their clinical practice. The NP case example tool is based on the nurse practitioner practice standard, which describes the accountabilities specific to nurse practitioners in Ontario. The purpose of the activity is to provide NPs with an opportunity to demonstrate how their clinical practice aligns with the NP standard. Next slide, please. So the NP standard has 6 standard statements with accompanying indicators. The purpose of this case example activity, for the purpose of this case example activity, the focus is only on health assessment, diagnosis, therapeutic management, and collaboration, consultation, and referral. The case example tool includes embedded questions within each section to allow the NP to demonstrate clinical reasoning and reflection. So not every section of the tool will apply to every NP's case example, therefore not applicable is permitted. Your submission will be evaluated by a peer assessor / coach who is also an NP. Please note, though, that this case example assessment is not a test of your clinical knowledge. We recognize NPs have a wide range of expertise across diverse practice settings. This tool allows an NP to demonstrate how their clinical practice aligns with the NP standards. However, the peer assessor / coach should see the application of NP standards in your case example. So for example, advanced health assessment, ordering tests, diagnosis, engagement with the patient, and evidence-based practice. The peer assessor / coach should also be able to follow your rationale and clinical reasoning. Next slide, please. Are we frozen? Are we able to go to the next slide, please? Might just be my side that's frozen, perhaps. Oh, there we go. All right, thank you very much. All right, so as well, this slide is just a reminder that there are examples of completed NP case examples on our webpage, which you can review, as you can see on the slide where the orange arrow is pointing. So links to examples can also be found on page 3 of your NP case example tool completion guide and page 5 of your QA assessment guide. So we do encourage you to review these. Next slide, please. So we will now take questions on the NP case example, and you can enter them in the chat box and we will respond. I'll now turn it over to Catriona to facilitate the questions.
Thank you so much, Christine. And again, we'll give a few moments to let any members submit their questions through chat. Again, you can type them in and send them to QA team, and I will help to facilitate that conversation with our advanced practice consultants. So we've had a question just around, again, the word count for the submission. And so the member is wondering whether there's a minimum or maximum word count for the NP tool, but I guess it goes back to any of the submissions. So I'm wondering, Karen, do you want to speak to that one?
Sure. Again, like the code of conduct, we did not put in any minimum or maximum word counts on it. We want members to review the submission criteria and review the case examples, and that will give you a good idea of the level of detail that we would expect to see. Again, consider that your example is going to be read by an NP who is not familiar with your practice. So they need enough information to determine that you are meeting the standards that are in the NP practice standards. So let that be your guide. Use your clinical judgment for how much detail you think that an NP reading your example would require. Do you have anything to add to that, Christine?
No, Karen, I think you touched on everything. I agree.
Thanks, Karen. So we've had another question that's come in, and Christine, I'm wondering if you might want to answer this one. So do we need to write which NP standard applies to our case?
Well, I think so. In the tool, it actually has it at the top. We define sort of each subcategory, and I believe that we have a small explanation under each indicator. I'm not quite sure though, Karen, if you have something to add, because I know each question, we have like embedded questions under each of them that sort of clarify what we expect under each subsection in the case example.
Right. So the way the tool has been developed, the 4 standards that we are talking about are all included in the tool already. So you will be addressing all of the standards that are relevant to your case example. So for example, health assessment is already in there. Diagnosis is already in there. So all 4 of them, and there are embedded questions within each. I think once you have a look at the tool, you'll understand that. So you do not have to write this section is about health assessment because it will already fall under that section.
Yeah, and I think, again, the tools have been set up in a way to help make it easy for completing and meeting the requirements, but we do encourage you to look at the examples online and look at the evaluation criteria for the NP case example in your guide. But if you have any questions or want some further assistance, please reach out to our team and we'd be more than happy to answer your questions. Okay, we have another question that's come in, another member who is on maternity leave, and they've been on leave since December 2020. They returned to work in November, and they're just wondering if they can choose a case from their practice experience from prior to their leave in 2020. Christine, do you want to try that one?
Yeah, sure. So I believe you can think back to a case that is reflective of your practice. I think the important piece, as we had mentioned, wasn't to, it was to sort of demonstrate something that does reflect your practice and is sort of utilizing all the 6 standards from the NP standard of practice. So I think that's the important piece as well. If you think back and it's reflective and it meets the criteria in the guide, and yeah, I think that's okay.
Thanks so much, Christine. We've had another question. When we write tests, like ordering blood work, do we list all the tests? And I'm assuming this would be under the health assessment section. Karen, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So yes, I think it falls under diagnostics. So under diagnosis, I think I think what is helpful is when you go to the nurse practitioner practice standard, and under each of those standards, you'll see the list of indicators, and those will help guide what kind of information we expect to see. So for example, if you look at the tool, it'll ask you questions such as what investigations did you order and why? So yes, you would then list everything you ordered, and if it asked for a rationale, you would provide a rationale. Again, I think once you look at the examples, they're a good indication of what a successful submission would look like and the level of detail required. So in order for the NP peer assessor to be able to determine that you applied those standards, you need to give them enough information for them to really be able to understand your case example.
Thanks so much, Karen, for that response. And these are great questions, everyone. So we still have a few more minutes. So again, if you have a question that you would like us to answer this afternoon, please feel free to submit it through the chat function at QA team. I'm the kind of person, sometimes I think of things after I exit a meeting. So if you have a question after today's session, again, you can contact us by emailing us at qaassessment@cnomail.org, and we would be happy to answer your questions. So we have one question that's come in, and it's from an NP just wondering why NPs have to do an additional QA assessment activity. So Karen, I'm wondering if you might want to take a stab at that question.
Sure. Well, NPs do have a broader scope of practice than nurses in the general class. And they are also required to have a clinical component to their practice, as we mentioned in the presentation. So for that reason, we have included an assessment that is a clinical focused assessment. So that is the reason why it's basically related to the greater risk associated with the broader scope of practice that NPs have. Do you have anything to add to that, Christine?
No, I think you touched on all the salient points.
Super. So I don't see any more questions coming in through our chat. So I think that brings us to the end of our session. Oh, one more question coming in. So thank you for that. We're happy. We're ready to stay on the line till 5, but I also am conscious of it's a busy time and it's towards the end of the day, so we don't want to prolong things. But let's take this last question from one of our members asking, when we're giving rationale for diagnostics and medications, can we reference best practice guidelines research from the case timeframe? I'm in critical care and had ongoing updates for our COVID patients that may not be current now.
Take that one, Katrina.
Sure, that would be great. Thanks, Christine.
So I think there's a section when you review the case example tool and the criteria where it asks for evidence that you use to support your decision making. So it's important to include anything that you use to support your decisions, and you can determine what those things are and how if they guide your practice.
And I would add to that also, if you're in a section that is asking for rationale and you feel that you need to add some more information about that, absolutely add whatever information you think is necessary. That would be fine.
Yeah, and I might just add to that further that, I appreciate particularly with COVID and people who are working with a pandemic response, our understanding of COVID and treatment has rapidly evolved. So if you are reflecting on a case from earlier in the pandemic or before the pandemic and, guidelines have evolved, just make a note of that. I mean, I think it's speaking to the evidence at the time that you were dealing with that particular case. Yeah, I think that would be fine to make a note on that. So unless there are any further questions, I'll give it a minute here. We will, I think, this brings us to the end of our information session for our 2021 QA assessment. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. A special thank you to our CNO team who helped to facilitate this session, and including Georgianne for our technical support. Again, I thank all the members who've joined us and to your commitment to patient safety and ongoing continued competence. If you have any questions or require any support around your submissions, please do not hesitate to contact us at QAassessment@cnomail.org. Again, we will send a link of this recording once it is posted on our website. Thank you so much and have a great evening.